pickpocketing, berserking, we take that away about DJN as a success story, and maybe as a story in the making still. The sobering fact that we need to keep into account is that in challenging global finance, civil society is still very few in number, and in terms of the road to still cover, we are at the beginning. And to illustrate this, I want to point out a figure which Helmut Hangheier, who researched civil society institutions in the aftermath of the economic and financial crisis, he looked at the US. And according to the National Center of Charitable Statistics in the US, only 160 of the 370,000 larger NGOs focus on public finances, taxation, and policies of financial markets. And that's 0.1 of all NGOs in the US and 1% of their overall budget. And this is a sobering fact because it helps us appreciate the significant role played by those few organizations. And Canadians for Tax Fairness is one of them. I'll invite Denis now to speak about the Canadian experience. And Canadians for Tax Fairness in their brochure, which you'll find outside, saying we want to change the way Canada talks about taxes. And I think that's a very important place.
So I'm going to talk about campaigning for tax fairness. We're Johnny-come-latelys to the tax fairness world. We're riding on the coattails of other great work that has been done. But as a long-time campaigner on various things, I make no apology for it. It's a very smart tactic to start campaigning on something where a lot of the good research has already been done for you. So, welcome to Canada. This is our Prime Minister, current Prime Minister. Hopefully he won't be around for too much longer. But this is an actual quote of what he says. I don't believe that any taxes are good taxes. Can you believe that? Prime Minister Harper, the reason he is against taxes is because he hates the Canadian welfare state. We're too much like Sweden. And he would rather that we become meaner and individualistic and nastier the way he is. He's everybody. And he knows that attacking taxes, attacking Medicare, attacking our seniors' benefits, attacking the key elements of the Canadian social programs would not get him anywhere, because one of the most important things, most valued things for Canadians is our Medicare system. The greatest hero, a recent survey found, was Tommy Douglas, who brought in Medicare. So, the way to achieve his ends is to cut taxes, create artificial deficits, and justify then the need for cutbacks in order to balance the budget. If I may be permitted a small advertisement for our book, The Great Revenue Ride, How to Stop the Tax Cut Scam and Save Canada. This is a book that we published a year ago. It already has sold out its first run. It's in its second printing. But what's happened is a great revenue robbery of $40 billion since 2005, annually lost to government revenue. And that means governments are a lot less able not only to provide the level of services that we've been accustomed to, but to tackle any future problems that we have in terms of Aboriginal issues, poverty, climate change, you name it. It handcuffs governments from being able to do anything. So we have had several campaigns. Our first campaign was the Stop Corporate Tax Cuts campaign. Canada had a corporate tax rate of about 35%. It's now down to combined federal provincial of 25%. We haven't had much success on stopping the federal corporate tax cuts, but we have been able to turn around several provinces who have increased their taxes on corporations or have not proceeded with some of the cuts that were planned. So we did have some success there. What's interesting to note here is that pretty well all that tax cut money has not produced any jobs and has resulted in $600 billion of dead money sitting in corporate coffers, not being invested, not being used. In fact, it's a fallacy. People have this conception when governments tax money, it takes money out of the economy. The opposite is true. Governments tax money, but then they spend it. And when they spend it, there is actually a multiplier effect of 1.5, up to 1.5, depending on how it's invested. So we've got a lot more to fight on this one. But one, I hate leaving people depressed at the end of a conference like this. Last week, we had a victory in Ontario, where there was a very clear choice put to people, whether more corporate tax cuts or increasing investments in social and physical transportation and other infrastructure. And the Liberal Party that proposed investments and higher taxes, modest, but still higher, won. So that's good news. The second campaign we launched was the Tackle Tax Havens campaign. We did a number of things, but I just wanted to give you one example of a local group in Saskatoon who put up a billboard, cost them $1,000 a month, but we generated that billboard into all the media outlets, television news, radio interviews, front page coverage on newspapers that got picked up all across the country, focusing attention on Cameco, which is a uranium miner, that was responsible for it's not just Zambia that does this stupid thing of selling to a subsidiary in Switzerland at an artificially low price in order to transfer profits away and not pay Canadian taxes. So they were really upset by this. The third campaign we've launched this year is a closed tax loopholes campaign. I think we've targeted stock options, the unequal capital gains. Capital gains, if you work hard, you have to pay money on taxes on all of it. If you get your money from capital gains, you only have to pay taxes on half of it. It's totally unfair. And the corporate entertainment tax. There is more fraud going on in one Blue Jays baseball game than all the welfare fraud in Canada for a year. And yet, companies could get away with it. What have we learned? You need to have clear, achievable goals. You need to engage in broad public support, and you need to do that by making the issues accessible and talking about them in a way that makes sense to people. And having ways for people to engage, sending emails to political leaders, being able to take part in letters to the editor, engaging in the public debate. You need to have a strong media profile. That's been critical. We've got that last year. We had over 200 media hits, and in leading national media as well. And you need to then make sure that that message gets communicated to politicians effectively. I've actually appeared before the Canadian Parliamentary Finance Committee 6 times in the last 2 years. Can you believe it? And believe believe it or not, even with a conservative government, we actually had the Finance Committee in their pre-budget consultation report all-party support for a recommendation that we need to make taxes fair, that government needs to do more to go after tax havens, close tax loopholes. I couldn't believe it. And then the last 2 years in the federal budget, there was actually whole chapters on tax fairness, tax havens, tax loopholes. Now the rhetoric was much better than the actual substance, but nevertheless, we have had an impact. Future campaigns. Leading up to the next federal election, we want to develop a Rebuild a Better Canada. And the point here is not just tax fairness, but what is it we want to do with that money? What do we want to do in terms of building a better Canada and get people behind that? Because we certainly need some rebuilding in Canada after all the destruction. I'm also part of the Global Alliance for Tax Justice, and one of the campaigns that they're working on, and we're working on as well, is a campaign for corporations pay your fair share. And that would aim to provide some popular resources, campaign literature, and so on to support more public understanding and engagement support for the OECD tax process. But I think, and that's being very ably done by the BEPS monitoring group, but what we want to really prioritize is getting some public support for increasing the upgrading the status of the UN Tax Committee, and especially focus on the extractive industry taxation subgroup that they've got going. And we want to support some of the regional initiatives that are quite encouraging, given that the BEPS may not actually deliver that much. And finally, we're hoping to develop a campaign on Save the Planet Tax Carbon. So I do believe that this is another huge opportunity. This conference is an example of the tax justice movement trying to extend its reach beyond just the tax people and the policy wants to include the human rights community. And I believe the next real challenge will be to extend it even further, because we have many allies in the environmental movement who need to join with us and join forces to try to develop a global campaign for a carbon tax. That's it for me.